Any object that we have in our scene, we can modify using the Select and Move, Select and Rotate, Select and Scale tools. I'm going to show you how all of these work. Right now, if you click on an object, you can see that it's selected because it's highlighted, and you can see that its name is shown here, the name section. If we want to move this object, the tool that we want to use is the Select and Move tool. We can access the Select and Move tool by clicking on this icon right here, or better yet, just pressing the W key on our keyboard. And what you'll see is that now this specific UI element is going to appear that consists of 3 arrows pointing in different directions, and we call that one the gizmo. The gizmo is a UI element that is used to move an object precisely in 1 or 2 axes at a time. The way we move an object is we hover with our mouse over the axis in which we want to move our object. And as you can see, if I hover my cursor over the x-axis, which is the red arrow, it's going to turn yellow, whilst all of the others are going to remain green and blue as they were before. If I left click and drag, I can now move my object along the x-axis without being able to move it along the z or y-axis, which means I can now move my object only left or right and not up and down or forward and back, regardless of which direction I drag my mouse. If, on the other hand, I wanted to move this box upwards, what I want to do is I want to hover over the z-axis, and as you can see, when I'm hovering over it, it's going to be highlighted in the yellow color. Once it is, I need to left click and then drag upwards or downwards. And I'm going to move my box only upwards and downwards, not left to right or front to back. And while I'm holding my left mouse button, even if I drag left to right, nothing's going to happen because I've constrained the movement of this box only to the z-axis. And it's the same with the y-axis. As you can see, if I hover over it, the arrow that points in the direction of the y-axis is going to become highlighted with the yellow color. And if I left click and drag, I'll only be able to move the box front to back and not left to right or up or down. Sometimes, however, I want to move my object in 2 different axes at once. So let's say I want to move it in the x and z axis, or along the plane that's formed by the width and the height of our world space. If I want to achieve that, I need to hover over this rectangle that's formed between the x and z axis, and as you can see, it's going to be highlighted yellow as well, and the z and x axes are going to be highlighted yellow. If I left click now, I can move my object up and down and left and right simultaneously, but I won't be able to drag it forwards or backwards. You can see that in my front view, which is on the top right, and in my left view, which is on my bottom left, as well as my top view, that my box is moving only in 2 directions. It's not moving forward or backwards. It can be best seen in the top view because however I move my box, it never changes its Y position. Likewise, I can just hover over any of these views, so let's say the top view, and if I want to move my object horizontally along the X and Y axis without moving it in the Z axis, so without changing its height position, I can just right click on the top view, hover over the rectangle that stands between the X and the Y axis, left click and drag it, and now I'm going to change the horizontal position, move along the horizontal plane without being able to accidentally change the height position of my cube. So that's the way in which we use the Move tool in 3ds Max. We can also rotate objects in our scene by using the Select and Rotate tool. We can access the Select and Rotate tool by clicking on this Select and Rotate icon, or better yet, by using the shortcut, which is the letter E on our keyboard. If we press the letter E, the currently active tool is Select and Rotate, which allows us to select each object by clicking on it and to instantaneously rotate it. What you can see right now is that our gizmo is no longer presented by 3 arrows that point in 3 different directions, but better yet, it's represented by 3 circles that determine the direction of our rotation. I'll just press Alt-W to full screen. And now I can show you how we can rotate an object. If I want to rotate this object only around its Z-axis, I want to hover over the circle that's parallel to my horizontal plane, and that's this one. If I left click and drag now, you can see that my box is being rotated, but only around the Z-axis, which means only around the vertical axis. Likewise, if I want to rotate it around the X-axis, I just need to hover over the circle that goes around the X-axis, left click and drag to change the rotation. What you might notice is that as I'm rotating, I see 3 different numbers changing right on top of my rotate gizmo. And what that's showing me is the current rotation of my object in Euler angles. And as I'm currently only rotating around the X-axis, only the X rotation is changing. You can see that the Y and Z rotation are constantly 0. Again, if we want to rotate around the Y-axis, we need to click on this circle that goes around the Y-axis, and we can just drag and rotate. We can also rotate our objects totally freely by clicking anywhere on this sphere and just rotating it freehand. Also, we have this gray circle that goes around our rotate gizmo. And if we click and drag, it's going to rotate our object parallel to the plane of our viewport. So this gray circle right here is only determined by the angle at which we are viewing the object. So if we view it from the top, left click and drag, it's going to rotate it like this. If we look at it from the side, it's going to rotate it like this. So it's dependent of the viewport or the view which we are using to look at our object. What you can see again down here beneath the timeline is that we have specific values for the X, Y, and Z rotation. These are the values of the rotation of our object in relation to world space. If we want to reset the rotation of our object, we can just simply go in here and type in 0, enter, and hit tab, 0, enter, and again tab, 0, enter. What we've done now is we've reset the rotation of this object, and its rotation is 0, 0, 0 with relations to the world space. We can also use these parameters to type in a very specific rotation for our object. So if we want to rotate it, let's say 45 degrees around the x-axis, we can just type in a value of 45 here, and it's going to be rotated by 45 degrees. I'll just type in 0 to reset that. Another really cool feature that we can use is the angle snap toggle. The angle snap toggle can be accessed either by clicking on the angle snap toggle icon or by pressing the letter A. on our keyboard. With the angle snap toggle turned on, if we start rotating using the rotate gizmo, you will see that we won't be able to rotate totally freely, but our rotation is going to have values of 5 degrees at a time. So our rotation is always going to snap to a value of 5 degrees. And if I rotate around the x-axis right here, you'll see that my x rotation is changing from 5 to 10, 15, 20, and so on. This is quite useful if you want to rotate an object by, let's say, 90 degrees along the vertical axis. I can just left click the blue circle and drag it until I get a value of 90 degrees. If we want to change the snap angle amount, so let's say that we don't want it to snap to 5 degrees, but we want it to snap to, let's say, 10 degrees, the way in which we can do that is by right-clicking either on the angle snap toggle or any of the other snaps, and the grid and snap settings is going to appear. Here, we can go into the options, and under general, we have an angle value. So right now it's set to snap to 5 degree values, which means that if we start rotating, it's going to snap to a value of 5 degrees. So we can go from 0 to 5 to 10 to 15 and so on. We can change that value to any number we want. Let's say 10 degrees can work for us. Press enter. And now we select our objects and try to rotate it. It's going to rotate by 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 degrees and so on if the angle snap toggle is turned on. We'll switch that back to 5 degrees. Press enter. We can close the grid and snap settings window at this point, and we can exit our angle snap toggle just by pressing the letter A on our keyboard. And now we can rotate our object freely in increments that we want.